Okay, well, let's go ahead and get started as we have some members who are still streaming in through to get into us to see this morning and hear from our great panelists. You know, it's such an honor this morning to be able to connect with colleagues in Tel Aviv and also to bring Lior, who is a CEO of Quali, who is located in Austin, into this conversation. So with that, I would really like to get to the most important people of this conversation, Lior, Limor, and Zeev. Let's go to our panelists and we'll do a quick round of introductions. I'd rather you hear from them as opposed to me, what they're up to today. So let's go to our panelists. Lior, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Well, thank you. Lior Koryat, I'm the CEO of Quali. Quali is a growth stage startup in the field of cloud infrastructure automation. That means we're helping mainly enterprise customers accelerate their digital transformation journey as they move more applications to the cloud and as they consume more of the private and public cloud infrastructure, which is quite challenging. We have offices in Israel, in the UK, West Coast, East Coast, and our North America headquarters is out of Austin, Texas. Engineering is done in Israel, and most of the business functions are here in North America. We have hundreds of enterprise customers between large technology vendors, telcos, financial services institutes, and retailers around the world. And before Quali, I founded and ran a system engineering company in Israel, mainly servicing global companies in the defense and commercial industries. And before that, a pilot in the Israeli Air Force.
Wonderful. Thank you, Lior. We're so glad to have you with us this morning. Zeev, do you want to chime in here and introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you very much. And thank you, Lee, and thank you for the team for the Austin Chamber. We're really excited. We're a big fan of the Lone Star State. And we always like to collaborate with Texas and especially with Austin. So my name is Zeev Levi. I'm a VP of International Relations and Business Development at the Federation of Israeli Chamber of Commerce. We're the biggest business organization in Israel. We collaborate together with the Austin Chamber of Commerce. We associate thousands of businesses in Israel from all types of businesses, whether they're startups or more mature companies or importers for that sense. So we have a very large diversity and capabilities to help companies, both Israelis who wants to work in the States and both American companies who wants to enter Israel and want to either source technologies or find export markets. So we help in that sense, and we work, as I mentioned before, in collaboration with the Austin Chamber.
Thank you, Zeev. Limor.
Well, thank you, Lee, and thank you for the Austin Chamber of Commerce for organizing this webinar. My name is Limor, and I work for the Bird Foundation. I'm the Deputy Executive Director. The Bird Foundation is the U.S.-Israel Binational Research and Development Foundation. We fund collaboration between Israeli and American companies, developing new technologies and bringing it to market. It's an organization that was established by the U.S. government and the Israeli government. And prior to working for the Bird Foundation, I used to be the Economic Council for Israel in Chicago and also in Atlanta. I used to live in the States for 13 years. And I'm also excited to be here. And I also have my colleague who's focusing on promoting the relationship between Texas and Israel. Maya Vardi Shoshana is also joining us in this webinar. So we hope that we can help to promote the collaboration between Israeli and Austin-based companies. Thanks to this webinar.
Thank you, all three of you. And, you know, I have absolutely been so fortunate to have traveled to Israel several times in my role at the Chamber. And truly, it is one of my favorite communities. You know, it embraces new travelers and new opportunities and is innovative. And that's kind of where I would love to launch this conversation. I mean, Zeev, for those who have not had the opportunity to be on the ground in Tel Aviv and all of Israel, you know, help us get a sense of the innovation and the entrepreneurial spirit that is so overwhelmingly present in Israel.
Sure. I mean, first of all, let me just start. For those of you who haven't been to Tel Aviv, we have a great beach, great weather. So regardless of the innovation, you should come. Like it's really like great people, great food, Mediterranean Sea. Definitely worth the travels. Yeah, I think we're gonna have direct flights from Leo. You
Dallas.
should tell us. Yeah, they're gonna be direct flights now from Texas. So that's gonna be amazing. Look, I think majority of people have heard, already the brand is out there that Israel is, is the startup nation. That's the coin phrase here, and it's like, and I want to quote from Warren Buffett, who said, if you're going to go to the Middle East and you're looking for oil, so skip Israel, but if you're looking for brains, so that look no further. And in fact, Israel, we were one of the only countries in the Middle East that until just recently never had any natural resources. In fact, our only natural resource was between our left ear and our right ear, and we needed to kind of like use it. I think that in terms of the innovation landscape, and maybe I will go more specifically into the entrepreneurship landscape, I think that it starts with the fact that necessity is the mother of all innovation. We had to innovate. We're a small country. 70% of our land is arid land. We're surrounded with not so friendly neighbors. We needed to cope with our own, and a lot of the problems that we have dealt 70 years ago when we started Israel, which is a startup. It's a very young country. It's challenges that the world are facing today. So whether it's water or agriculture technologies, that in Israel we needed to basically deal with food securities. We needed to deal with water securities. We didn't have water. We needed to deal with communication. A lot of our defense industries have then dribbled down into civilian uses, whether it's optical and radars and cyber and encryption and many other security issues that Israel needed to deal back then. Is now in the forefront. The world needs food challenges, water, security, healthcare. Israel is one of the pioneer and leading countries in healthcare. So Israel came to become a startup nation or a very entrepreneurial country out of necessity, really. But it's also a very cultural issue. And those of you who have visited Israel can spot it right on from the first second they leave the plane and start talking to people, engaging with people. We are very much engaging. We are very much challenging people. We like to question everything. There's a very strong drive in the air. You see that there's a very win attitude, and people are entrepreneurs in Israel. They knock on every door. They're a very solution-driven approach in Israel, which is quite unique. And I think most of it is because we are a very small market, and every small startup immediately what they think their market are not Israel. They're not. It's not like some guys in I don't know, in Dallas or Austin or whatever it is. They're looking in America and the state. They have such a big market and such a potential growth. In Israel, you immediately, even if you're in your parents' garage, you immediately think on Shanghai or New York or Austin. We want to get them more to Austin. So you think big. You think of big solutions. So I think that you have a very great mentality of workforce and human capital that is really unprecedented, together with a very strong government support, a great strong cooperation between academia and industry, very quality academic institutions, world-renowned, modern infrastructure in Israel. So you have legal, banking, financial accounting, IP. We have a free trade agreement with the United States, a lot of different investment authorities, investment treaties that we have. And I think in Israel, currently, you have a very, very strong and developed ecosystem. This ecosystem contains more than 400 multinationals and R&D centers from all the biggest names that you know, Apple, Intel, HP, Google, you name it. More than 164 Israeli VCs funds in Israel, 71 hubs, 57 innovation labs, etc., etc. So it's a very, very strong ecosystem that in Israel they created. And I think one of the most important thing is is that it already evolved, it already matured. So you have a very strong maturity of the founders. You have last figures that I read is you have more than 26,000 Israeli entrepreneurs. 33% of them are, are founders, people who founded one company or more than that. People who actually did an exit, worked with American companies, worked in other markets. So you have a very strong and mature market. And that's a great market to be in. I'll
Yes.
stop here. I don't want to.
No, and I think you bring up great points. I mean, that was one of the one things that really stood out to me is just how rich and well constructed and how thriving the ecosystem truly is. How many opportunities there are to hear from founders from the US and from Tel Aviv and Israel, all throughout Israel, actually, and just that constant beat of the drum of how to succeed and thrive. And Lior, I kind of want to bring you in right here, unplanned, but I'd love to, as a CEO and launching in Austin and having your engineers in Israel, I mean, tell us about how you have seen some similarities between Israel and Austin and how they play well together.
There is definitely the communication challenge that Zev mentioned, but outside of that, there is a great similarity in terms of the culture, the innovations, or the innovative spirit. The both are very young and vibrant communities, and a lot of talent that comes out of the university with the desire to go and innovate and create things. In Austin, there is a lot of culture and music and food that I think kind of blends very well into everything that is happening here. Similarly, in Israel, there is a culture that comes from a lot of innovation that is beyond just tech, that blends into everything that is been done. There are a lot of similarities, at least in I think in the again, the level of innovation or the direction you would like to take the innovation to, the desire to win. What I found when I came here to Austin is that there is great moral fiber in everybody, and people join companies for the right reasons, right? It's because of the great teamwork that you will have here, and it's because you would like to build a winning platform. And as long as you have that, you're not necessarily looking left and right and, oh, somebody would offer me a little bit more and I'll jump ship and I'll move to the other company. You have that mentality similarly in Israel. So the desire to build a winning platform and go to battle with it and to succeed is really property that I think Austin and Israel share. I found in that another aspect of it is the Southern hospitality here in Austin or in Texas is not just a cliche, it's actually happening. I was very pleasantly surprised when I moved here to Austin with zero network that I really received a lot of help. Everybody that I reached out to genuinely wanted to help me. Even candidates that didn't want to leave their current workplace, they still met with me and offered their help in opening up their network to me. You would see the same in Israel. You would see the same desire to help people and the same desire to it's not about competition. It's about, okay, how can I share? How can I help? So I see this to be very similar between both territories. So in a way, it is young and upcoming, and because of that, maybe that's the approach. Also, because I found that in Austin, most of the residents in Austin were not necessarily born and raised in Austin. Again, very similar to Israel in a sense. So you would see that everybody has received help when they joined and when they came in and when they started and opened their business. Therefore, they're helping others in a very similar way. So yeah, those are, I think, great similarities and properties. If you want to build a business with same foundation of culture, you would find that between Austin and between Israel. Communication would be somewhat of a challenge, but you need to embrace that, and then you really know how to work very well with that. Israelis are very direct, not so much politically correct because we don't understand it, right? We don't know, it doesn't compile well in our minds, but at least I definitely see that at least Texans are more direct than other citizens of the US or residents of the US. So it kind of much closer to Israel than other states in the US.
I would agree. I would agree. I think there is a similarity in directness and the get things done attitude and moving quickly along. I mean, Limor, you've been focused on Texas and Austin with the Bird Foundation.
Yes, and I have a very direct approach. I have a very specific objective in this webinar. We are going to bring at least one project between Austin-based company and Israeli companies submitted to our next round
Good.
call for proposal. So let me a little bit elaborate about what we do, what we offer, and then we can talk about how we can get things done. So as I explained, BIRD is a U.S.-Israel organization, a foundation that was established by the U.S. government and the Israeli government to promote and support collaboration between Israeli and American companies developing new technologies. There's great similarity between the Austin tech vibe and the Israeli technology vibe. As Lior said before, there is definitely a lot of common culture between both the countries, and obviously with Austin. Our job at the foundation is to facilitate and promote this collaboration. We are introducing companies to one another, and we're not only doing the matchmaking, but we also have the ability to fund the technology. Basically, if a project is submitted to a board of directors, they can get non-dilutive funding of up to $1 million per project. It's a great offering, not just because of the funding, but we also offer to the mechanism between the companies that will help them to develop their technologies together, to integrate them and bring a joint solution to the market. So we are offering a non-dilutive funding, which is divided between the companies, which is providing funding to the R&D costs of both companies. But we're also offering the mechanism, because it's a risk-sharing mechanism, which means that if the project is successful and generates revenue, then the companies have to repay us back from the revenue of the technologies that we supported. But if for whatever reason the project was not successful, then obviously the companies do not have to repay us back funding. So it's a very, I think it's a very attractive funding, but I think what's no less attractive is the fact that we are giving the capabilities to meet with one another. Part of the process of submitting the project, it's going through evaluations on the US side, on the Israeli side. So we offer a stamp of approval to the projects that are funded by the BIRD Foundation. And as I said before, my goal is to get at least one project submitted between an Austin-based company and Israeli companies in the next round. I also want to, yeah.
So Limor, I want to interrupt you there. So I think what's so interesting about the BIRD Foundation is that there's ongoing opportunities for this, right? So you and I have spoken in the past about applications on energy projects. Right now you're doing homeland security. And as you were saying, I mean, the amount of funding that's going into BIRD to make this happen is, to me, astonishing, just to see the financial support and the opportunity for collaboration.
Yes, it's definitely the funding, but it's also the support that exists. And I want to bring another call for proposal, which I think is very relevant to Austin. The government of Israel and the government of the United States have established the Energy Center. Especially, it's a unique program that funds the Israeli consortia and American consortia who are trying to promote and develop new technologies. We have an open call for proposal to fund technologies in cybersecurity. We have this call for proposal open, and we are here to try to facilitate the introductions between the companies. It's a funding that is available for the industry and the academia as well. And I know that Texas University in Austin has a lot of capabilities in cybersecurity. And this is something that I'd like to promote and see how we can work together to bring at least one proposal coming out of Austin.
Great. I would love to see
about $6 million funding, which I think is very good.
It is very unique. I mean, Zayav, let's build on that. I mean, one of the things that I was amazed to see during my time in Tel Aviv, especially, is how many unique relationships and joint, I would say, collaborations with U.S. states and Israel. So share a little bit about how many formal collaborations there are. And, I would even highlight, I think Texas is missing out on a lot of opportunities, just that I'm seeing with other states. Can you share kind of some things that you're seeing?
Sure,
Yes.
of course. And there are many, of course, I'm going to talk about the pre-COVID era where
Right.
we actually could interact and fly. But let me just say that, I think that very, when I started, I think very early, we kind of realized that it's the states that kind of like push for the economy in the states and less the federal government.
Right.
No offense, we saw that the states and local regions, those who work strategically and knows how to identify, understand that if they want to attract FDI is different between every other country. I mean, not all countries are, are Germany or Japan, where they have those kind of like big manufacturing when they create like 4,000 people. If you have a vehicle automation plant or whatever. Israel is a different type of countries, and obviously there's a very strong strategic alliance between Israel and the United States, whether it's in cultural, whether it's defense, and obviously commercial. We're talking about Israel as the number one export destination of American companies in the Middle East, the 25th largest trading partner of the United States worldwide. So there's some numbers here. And in terms of investments, the U.S. is the largest investors in Israel. And we see that number has changed as well. One of the reason, and that I'm just going to give a little bit of background to your question, is there was a research by our Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Massachusetts who kind of tried to see what is the contribution of foreign companies to the workforce, and they discovered that Israeli startups in that area is the third largest contributor of work of employers in that region. So you see that Israeli startups, when they come to the United States, and obviously the U.S. is the number one destination for American technology startups, capital, you name it. They not only bring a value added of innovation to the market, to the U.S. And to partnership with other companies in the U.S., but they also contribute to the creating more jobs and creating value-added jobs as well. So that's a very important fact to remember. It's not only about manufacturing. Second thing is, we have, I think, every once in a month, and Limor also knows that we have a different governor coming to Israel. And we're fortunate. We're a small country, but we're very fortunate to have different states coming to Israel. And one of the main issues is that most Israeli companies, and this is something that you need to take up with Lior, most Israeli startups, when they look at the states, they only look at New York or California. That's it. And they ignore the rest of the states. And that's a big, big, big mistake. And one of the things that I feel that we should fix, and this is why I love this approach, is to bring the attention of more Israeli startups into different states, and the capabilities and the fact that they have much more opportunities in those countries, especially Texas, which is the second largest economy in the States. I mean, I don't need to tell the audience here how much Texas is important. We have governors, we have different associations that we work with, different America-Israel chambers, etc. And we have great ties with all the EDOs and economic corporations of the governor's offices, chambers of commerce, etc. But I think at the end of the day, we need to bring more companies interested into different states, especially Texas, I believe that. And I think that there's two factors here. Israeli companies are looking for market and they're looking for capital. And we need to help with those two.
Well, and Zayav, on that, I know the Texas governor frequents Israel. And we actually, I think the last 2 times I was in Tel Aviv, we actually also had the San Marcos chamber there as well, talking to Israeli founders and those that were specifically interested in AI and cybersecurity. And so it does seem like Texas participants are on the ground more in Tel Aviv and beyond, which I love. And we have been working with the Israeli consulate in Houston very closely on building those relationships. Absolutely. I mean, I think it's so important, and I think it's an untapped potential continuously over and over and over for specifically the Austin region and Israel. And Lior, I'd love to get you to chime in here, and I want to bring in a question from one of our audience members. The question is, what drew you and Quali to Austin? And so kind of building on Zayeb saying New York and California are really the main, I mean, share with us your journey, because you're a great example.
And I think I'm also a great example of how we missed on Texas to begin with. It's like many Israeli companies or startups that you start in Israel and you build a very innovative product, and you build a very, very strong engineering team. And you start selling that, maybe you try it out in Israel, but the market is too small to grow fast, at least in our space. So we started selling in Europe, and we started selling in North America, and we reached a point where we were ready to commit to the market with the most growth potential, which for us was North America. And at that point in time, we obviously looked at where in North America do we want to base our headquarters, and we chose California because of we had more customers there and more partners in California. We didn't even think about Austin. We were aware of that opportunity. California is great, nothing to take away from the innovation that happens in the Bay Area, but it comes with its own challenges. And what drove us to Austin was basically we reached a point where we needed to now go to our next growth phase. And we wanted to do this in a big way. Again, California has its own challenges. I was at that point in time very open to look at other locations in the US and look between the East Coast, West Coast, all the way up to Seattle on the West Coast, between New York and Atlanta and North Carolina. And what drew me into Austin actually was we started building or started working with partners that were based here in Austin as well. And that opened up the understanding and the realization that there is a lot of tech happening in Austin. There is a great talent pool. And we needed to build on our go-to-market and sales, marketing, customer success, support, etc. And we found an amazing talent pool here. A lot of companies have those centers here in Austin. Some of them did it because of the ability to scale in a more affordable way than West Coast and East Coast. Some did it for the talent. We did it actually mostly for the talent and the ability to build something that is sustainable. As I've mentioned before, build a platform for growth. It comes with other benefits as well, but it's, again, we missed out on that opportunity. We should have done it earlier in our journey. We are here only for a couple of years. We could have done it much sooner and benefit from that much sooner. And I think we would have been in a better place, I would say, just because of that. Because you in other regions you have you compete over resources. You have a different motivation in the employees that you bring in. It's a great innovative environment in the Bay Area and in New York, but I think it is lacking the longer term view of what you may achieve here when you find that in Austin. So we were blind to that to begin with. Right now, I'm trying to serve as an ambassador to what you could do as an Israeli company here in Texas and specifically in Austin. And yeah, I would welcome anyone who wants to reach out and to understand how to do this right and why. And I would definitely today, if I had to do it again, I would start from Austin. No questions asked. The market is very vast. It's mainly for companies like ourselves who are selling technology. The technology is not only to be sold within, just West Coast or East Coast. Even our partners are nationwide, and they're headquartered in different locations. So decision making is not necessarily just in the Bay Area or just in New York area. It depends on the industry. So it's today it's a little bit less important where you're headquartered. It's more important where you find the right partners for you and the ability to grow with the right talent pool. That's what I would recommend.
Well, and I agree with that so much, Lior, and thank you for sharing that with us. We're glad to have you in Austin. And, I think it's also really important to just to call out, Lior, as you're now in Austin, one of the benefits I would argue for the Austin region is now you have your investors who are coming into the Austin region. And those Israeli investors are now looking at other opportunities as well that exist, and looking for companies and other investors to meet with and talk with and to learn from while they're spending time here. And I think it's also a phenomenal opportunity for our local investors to start looking at more opportunities for investment for the Israeli companies that are not only in Austin, but abroad. I think there's just so many opportunities. Limor, haven't you've recently put someone in place in Austin, right?
Yes, we have Shiri, who is going to represent us here in Austin and also in the area. And she is going to promote specifically the Energy Center, which, as I said before, it's a great cooperation between the two countries, that funding consortia on the Israeli side and the American side. And Shiri will be in touch with you, and hopefully we can do some more in Austin.
I think that's great. And Zeev, I want to ask this question of you from Mark Nathan in our audience. And, he's a strong ecosystem leader here for tech and innovation, and specifically for CPG. And I think Mark raises a good question. What can we do more in the Austin region to continue to beat that drum in Israel? I know that it's helping that more of us are coming and actually spending time in Israel, right? So it's growing the personal relationships, it's spending time, investing in that time and effort and learning with one another. But, what else can we do to continue to play out this collaboration and see more of this? What do we need to be doing here?
Yeah, I saw the question. I think it's a great question to ask. First of all, it does help. It does help when you're coming. The fact that you took Israel, and I know Israel is not the only one on your list. You have also countries like Singapore and stuff like that. But the fact that you have a position in the Austin Chamber that kind of targets Israel and other few countries as a strategic partnership, where you come, you create those dialogues, you create those webinars, you create those different events that create awareness. That's for itself is important. I know that the governor office, Micah Traeger, and the rest of the people are very much involved in that as well. So kudos for them as well. I think the Israeli ecosystem in general is quite tight. So you have a lot of word to mouth. You need to have more ambassadors like Lior. I think that's the best way of doing that, because in the end of the day, if you have quality, professionals that can vouch, or they can, give their reference and testimonies, it's the best. But also, I think, when you look at Texas, and I know that you guys are suffering from it, the brand of Texas is oil and gas all the time. I know that you probably get sick out of it. We have also some issues of our own with our branding. But I, when I started with Texas, and it was when Governor Rick Perry came, I also thought of Texas only of oil and gas, but I didn't know that it has so much like healthcare, for instance, which is a great example of collaboration, great sector, great pillar to focus on both countries, healthcare, especially after the COVID era. I think very, very few people knows about the opportunity you have in healthcare in Texas. It's just amazing to understand all the research institutes, all the hospitals, all the, the amount of investments that you have there. Not only that, you have the communication corridor in Texas also. You have so many different multinational corporations and big giants of the industry, and a lot of money, a lot of capital, great market. It's one of the most populated countries in the States. You have, I think, one of the biggest positive of incoming immigration, of people who are coming to work. So I think there's so many information lacking, so much awareness that you need to still create, for those different pillars. And what I would recommend is to go to those different communities within Israel, whether it's healthcare, whether it's space and aeronautics, which is super interesting, whether it's cyber, whatever you're trying to attract, and kind of focus those kind of channels and create more awareness on those communities. Israel now is building communities.
Yep.
And that for me would be the focus, I think. I would also ask Limor that if she has, because she's dealing with that as well.
I think you brought a very good point. First of all, I think with regard to energy and gas technology, there is a great interest, growing interest in Israel, and actually the Texas region is the leader in the world in this field. So we have a lot more to do with this regard. There's a lot more interest among Israeli companies to work with Texas-based companies, and maybe we can, create a roundtable event. Can invite specific companies from the Austin side, from the Israeli side, and create a smaller event where companies can actually pitch one another and have one-on-one meetings online. I think there's a great desire, and the fact that unfortunately, at least for the time being, we won't be able to fly, looks like it. I think it's important for us to do something like this. But there's additional areas. We mentioned cybersecurity. There's a lot of things going on in Austin with regard to cybersecurity. Homeland security, definitely an area of interest also in Israel, and there's strength in both sides. And I think you mentioned also, Zev mentioned also the healthcare industry. This is a very important area. The whole issue of digital healthcare is of great importance nowadays. There's wonderful facilities and hospitals networks in Texas. They're wonderful inventors in Texas. And I think if we can do maybe as a follow-up to this event, more of a roundtable with specific companies that we can invite them for the discussion, we can actually create more of the introductions to one another. Advanced manufacturing, Lior is one of the companies dealing in this area, is also an area of interest. So if we pick up on those a little bit, those specific sectors and do something around them, I don't think there's a need to do very large events, but more like focus events. I'm sure we can get things done and create more partnerships and more introduction between the companies and investment, etc. There's also a growing investors in Israel who are interested in working with Texas. Same thing also goes with Texas. We can do something specifically around the venture capital associations. And that's something else that Austin can lead.
Well, I'm glad to hear that from both of you, because, what I heard on the ground when I was in Tel Aviv, especially with investors, was they wanted to see focus, right? And healthcare and health tech was one of the main areas with one of the investors I met with. And what was so interesting is when I returned to Austin, I was invited to Dell Medical School by Melly Price, and Sante Ventures, one of our investment companies here, actually brought in a lead surgeon from Israel to do a very, very large presentation to Dell Medical School surgeons. And it was a full house, and it was all on opportunities regarding specific surgeries. And I think what we need to do more of, right, building on what you two have offered, is really bringing in more similarities like that, where you have those that are truly connecting by sector, right? And then from investors also learning that, especially for Israeli companies that are coming into Austin, making sure that our local investors are also having an opportunity to invest, and how important that is. And also having ambassadors like all three of you, right, beating that drum and showing that founders and CEOs and companies like Lior, you at Quali, are actually doing well here, right? And having that support system and really showcasing that. And, I think that is the responsibility of those of us who are traveling, right, or traveled pre-COVID, and learn that face-to-face and growing those relationships and those opportunities. And then also you have such a rich, and like I was saying, a deep ecosystem of entrepreneurship in especially Tel Aviv. I saw all of these different speaking opportunities, and making sure that we're connecting and maybe bringing in US or Texas founders who are able to offer that. I was actually amazed to see how many US speakers were actually on that speaking circuit, even during my short times in Tel Aviv. It was really great to see that these collaborations all over the US were happening. I also want to get to Lindsay's question right here. So Lindsay, going the other way, what issues would a US company face in setting up an operation, say R&D in Israel? Who would like to go first on that one? Thank you, Lindsay.
You want? I can take a little bit. I think in terms, in terms of issues, I think human capital is one of the issues. I mean, I think the majority of Israel is not a cheap country. I mean, you wouldn't come to Israel for cheap labor.
Right.
So you have a lot of multinational companies, a lot of American companies who have R&D, or people, companies who either acquired companies and left the R&D in Israel, or came to establish more presence to the market. I think first of all, the issue is to find this good human resources. I think the competition in Israel for good human resources is quite tight because you have so much demand. So that would be it. Otherwise, I think if you find the right person for the activity, I think you're pretty much set. There's a lot of government assistance, a lot of embracing ecosystem here. So that's from my point of view.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it's mainly to find the core and the kernel around which you would build your center. That would also help attract talent, because again, talent is somewhat scarce with all the innovations happening. So if you have that kernel, and if you have the ability to communicate in a very efficient manner between a site in Israel and a site in the US, then you would win big, because you would get commitment and you would get that mentality of winning at all costs, right? People are going to battle. We don't know how to lose, right? It's not in our DNA. We cannot afford it because we don't have anywhere else to go, right? That's Israel. That's the mentality. So I think you would benefit in a great way, but you do definitely need to find the right kernel and the ability to attract talent from it, and to establish the proper communication between the two sites.
So Ze'ev and Lior, I mean, on that note, I mean, there's a few of us, right, in Austin specifically, that are fortunate that if anyone does need a connection, I mean, we're here, and anyone on this call should make sure to reach out to me or anyone on this call, and we'll definitely be sharing contact information. But for those who are interested in pursuing a relationship or an investor or an opportunity in Israel, where are some good places to start if you want to do your homework, right, and you're looking to get information on who you need to be talking to in Israel? I mean, where would you start?
I would perhaps start with, some GMs of large companies, large international companies. There are a lot of them in Israel. As I've said, you have many of the large corporates and technology companies are represented in Israel. It's beyond just an engineering center. They have other business aspects as well. So you would find that, and it's not that complicated to reach out to them, and you can definitely consult with them, and they have very good perspective of everything from a startup mentality to a large corporate mentality. Similarly, you can work with many of those VCs. Many of the large VCs today, they have representation in Israel as well, and a front office in Israel as well, and partnerships there, etc. So as I've said before, building a network and getting to the right people, it's not complicated. You just need to know where to start. Those are definitely going to be available to you.
I would add that in Texas, we have the Israel Economic Commission, and Shai Lufshitz is leading this organization. And a lot of the connections can be done free of charge through this organization, the Israel Economic Commission. You can always contact me or Ze'ev. There's also the America-Israel Chamber of Commerce. There's Israel Innovation Authority. I think in Israel, it's a lot easier to network with people and ask for assistance, and people will reach out and make the connection. It's a very unique ecosystem. You don't need someone to navigate or be in between. Remember that when I approached Lee when we came to Austin, and then the next time you told me you're coming, we all started to set up meetings for you with everyone that we could think of. I think it was overwhelmed with a number of companies and meetings that we can set it up. So with regard to Israel, I think it's a lot easier to make the connections, and there's a lot of people who are willing to assist. And if they won't be able to do it themselves, they will definitely connect it with somebody else who could do it for you.
Agreed. I mean, I think that's one thing I learned on the ground in Israel, that it seems like in Israel, and even just starting to get connected into Israel, that everyone really is just a phone call away. And I found that to be very true, regardless if I was meeting with a company founder, one of you, the government, whether it was an investor. I mean, the willingness and openness to connect. But just like Lior said, I mean, you definitely have to have a focus and an ask, and be ready to move quickly. It is a community that wants to get stuff done, which is actually quite welcoming and refreshing. And, you know, Mark Nathan followed up. I mean, the startup community in Israel, and there are plenty of resources in order to follow. And that is something that, Mark, thank you for sparking that. I will definitely share a short list of some newsletters and some opportunities just to kind of dive in for those interested, just to want to join those newsletters and be able to, you know, very casually be able to catch up to speed with what's going on in Israel. I think that would be very beneficial.
Lee, also one more thing. If you could share with us information about what Austin can offer Israeli companies, we can definitely be ambassadors here in Israel, and we can share it with the Israeli companies as well.
100%.
Yeah, and they have, I mean, not using names of the companies we've been talking about, but, you know, you and I have been talking about a company, and I think that it's really interesting to see how many more collaborations just between founders. So kind of talk through, you know, respecting those founders that we haven't connected yet, their names, but kind of talk through, you know, some opportunities that you found for connections.
Well, look, I think that for us, it was quite all over, quite scattered. I mean, I talked to Hadass, by the way. There's Hadass Tzur with me today that works with me. She hasn't moved. Unlike, I just heard more that you're doing you're bringing someone to Austin. So we're the only one out of the three who doesn't have presence in Austin. So maybe we'll send Hadass to it. But
I'm starting my video just to say that I'm on board with the plan.
Always good to see you, Hadass.
I think that I just want to say two things. First of all, I want to just go back to what Mark said, and also ask, and also with what Lior said before. I think if you really want to attract Israeli companies and Israeli entrepreneurs to Austin, you need to think a little bit different. As I mentioned before, I think you need to help a little bit more in helping them find the market. So Lior came because they started, I don't know, like selling there or had some clients. That's a lot of how Israeli companies start. When we spoke to Israeli entrepreneurs, why are you going? Why are you in New York? Why are you in South Carolina? Why are you in Georgia? Why are you in Austin? A lot of the time, it's either you have family, the investors, or you have the market start there. So what I would do it like a more proactive approach of helping companies to interact. And this is coming to your question. We saw companies from smart cities who are looking for or who were looking for companies who had different solutions, startups, and construction tech and healthcare, and now we did food tech. So we had a very variety of companies who were looking to enter to the U.S. market. And what we have done, because we have this network in Texas, we said, okay, let's skip New York and go right into the market. And we started doing it. And what we discovered that it's really echoes with what you already mentioned before. There's so many opportunities there. There's so many opportunities in Austin and in Texas in general. And I think this is how the approach should be. We need to find ways of how connecting companies more, whether it's with capital or with the market, with the clients. So that would be, I think, the really right approach for it.
Lior, do you want to add to that?
I want to add, when I was working for Israel Economic Council, we've done some research among the Israeli companies to find out what attracted them to establish their offices in a certain place. So usually the answers were where the investors were.
Yeah.
The second thing is where the CEO wanted to relocate to, for whatever reason. And the third reason was whether he had a local partner that he needed to be close to. I think those main reasons really haven't changed much. What we need to do a better job is sharing information about opportunities. For example, Austin, there's great talent in Austin. There's also wonderful tax opportunities,
Right.
which are very beneficial for companies to be aware of. There is a thriving ecosystem and investors. And I think if we can try to build the relationship between the two parties, we can create additional collaborations which can be beneficial. And we can do the same thing also for Austin-based companies who are interested in working with Israeli companies, whether it's to sell their own technology. Israel is very knowledgeable, especially in the areas of defense and security and cybersecurity. So I think for them, it's working with Israeli teams or selling their technologies here is a good stamp of approval. So this is something else that we can promote and do.
I agree.
And I would like to echo that on the investment side, because if there is going to be something that is going to accelerate attraction of Israeli, at least startups or younger companies to the Texas state or the Austin region, that would definitely be around investment, which is not that all. There is a strong PE scene here in Austin, private equity. There is also on the lending side, you would find quite a bit of options here. The VC scene is not as active, at least with Israel here in Austin. And I think that's another thing that could be done better in order to attract mutual companies to each region, as well as spark this collaboration. I think what the Bird Foundation is doing can definitely bring closer Israeli companies and Austin-based companies. That would definitely expose more the region to Israel. And
Actually, a great suggestion.
Yeah, and that's definitely, funding is definitely a major driver. Operationally, I would still say, and also as Limor said, if it's a personal reason to relocate to Austin rather than another area, for sure I would say Austin wins big, but it has to come with the entire picture of funding as well, can also attract and make it happen faster and accelerated.
I agree. I think it's a component that has to be there in order for it to be a success, and vice versa, right? So Israeli founders that are coming into Austin have to find success here to get on the map with the Israeli investors, right? And then that opens somewhat of a door, I would say, for Austin to be more on the map for Israeli investors and for Austin companies to make that move into Israel. And then I want to get to this question, Limor, from Heidi, and it's a really interesting question. I mean, she already has a relationship with an Israeli startup, and since she wants to know if there's still a chance for her to get involved in the Bird Foundation. She's one of the largest outpatient medical groups in town, and they have implemented an AI virtual assistant tool for COVID-19, which is free. So they'd like to expand on the strategic relationship. So could Bird be an opportunity for Heidi and the team?
Yes, we actually have a call for proposal. I just shared it in the chat system. And you can definitely reach either me or Maya. Her name is also on the call for proposal and her contact information. And we will definitely be happy to have conversations and guide her how to submit a proposal to the Bird Foundation. The submission deadline is September 1st. So it would be great if Heidi can reach out to us after this call.
Great. Thank you. So does anyone have anything else that we've missed or you would like to add before we do a roundup and thank yous to each of you?
I would love to go. I feel like I'm getting this brand of this talker here, but
No, you're good.
But I'll go ahead and I'll just say again, and I said it before. I'm being fortunate to have this ability to look at different states. I've been working with Rhode Island, Utah, literally different states, and not only in the United States, but I'm also working in Europe, in Asia, etc. So I think recently, in recent years, there was a big competition, big kind of like we're called high-tech safari. There's a lot of interest about this innovation in Israel, a lot of delegation, Chinese, all over the place. And there was a lot of attraction and there was a lot of fatigue out of that. I think that out of all of that, really, the United States is still the #1 exporting market with the US, with Israeli companies, the #1 source of investors. And it's the #1 ally culturally and commercially with Israel. So we have the greatest connection with the United States. Out of that, I feel that we should definitely focus more on countries that are, and excuse me, all of my friends from New York and California, I keep on saying that are not from those areas, and especially Texas. I have learned so much about Texas, and I think Leo mentioned before that the Southern hospitality. I think Israelis are looking for community.
Yeah.
You can't live outside of your community. Israelis are very, very, very well connected to being Israeli and for the family values, the community. So you need a place where you have a community. I think Texas has that, and I think that's a very much important ingredient in success. And we just need to do more of this. A lot of great ideas, just more of this. That's my final words. And you are more than welcome to contact us. By the way, also for exporting, if you're looking to enter Israel. And we're going to talk about it in a different maybe seminar or webinar, but there's a lot of opportunities for American companies to look at Israel as an export destination, whether it's to innovation or their goods or their services. So feel free to do that as well. It's not only about innovation startups.
Agreed. Well, with that, I want to be able to say, Lior, have a fantastic day, and Zeev and Limor, I hope you have a wonderful evening. Limor is usually in front of the Mediterranean Sea driving when we get her on the phone, so we're missing the Mediterranean Sea, but it's lovely to see you all. And I really do want to give a big shout out to, Quali Lior, Quali in Austin is just a phenomenal CEO, and I'm so glad that he's here. And of course, to Zeev and Hadass with the Federation of Israeli Chambers of Commerce. They've been a really great collaborator and partner and have always taken meetings with us when we're on the ground in Tel Aviv, and it's always been so much appreciated. And then, of course, to the Bird Foundation, branching really Israel and the US. I mean, to Limor and to Maya, I mean, thank you so much for always taking time. And I look forward to doing another round of this on exporting into Israel. I think there's so much potential here for collaboration, and I will continue to beat that drum. Like I said, Israel is one of my favorite places, and I hope to be back on a plane to come see y'all very, very soon. So thank you all. And with that, I think our final piece before we say goodbye is we have a couple of upcoming webinars. One is leading medical experts sharing how to stay healthy during the pandemic. That's coming up on the 26th. And then we have a chamber conversation with Comptroller Glenn Hagar on the 1st. So check those out, but we will be following up with everyone with contact information, ways to stay on top of what's going on in Tel Aviv, and all of Israel, actually. And thank you all. Have a great day. Have a great evening. And I hope to see you all very soon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.